Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we are going back to a book, Eloquent JavaScript, talking about Chapter 8, Bugs and Errors. Today we're going to be talking about some error propagation. I know it's been a while since we have done Eloquent JS, but for all the aspiring developers or current developers out there who were asking me to continue along with this series, finally got back to it. I'm going to try to be more consistent with it because we are doing Atomic Habits still. Check out that book. We got the first two videos out over this last month. But today we're going to be focusing on Eloquent JS, a very popular series we were doing. And today talking about error propagation. So what does error propagation exactly mean? Well, it basically means that you handle errors in a fashion to where you let the user know exactly what went wrong and you handle it gracefully. So you don't just completely halt your program. Can be a very jarring experience for a user. You click on a button, all of a sudden it just crashes and the user's left in the dust without even knowing what to do. You want to be able to let them know, hey, this happened. Hey, refresh the page, or hey, start from scratch, log out, what have you, however you want to handle it. But you don't want to let your program just crash. A lot of times you want your program to keep running too. That's the thing that Merijan points out in the book, is that yes, maybe you do want to convey that something went wrong, but you don't want the page to just completely blank out. You still want to show the current page that the user is on, but you want to show the error. So you can do this in a variety of different ways that we're going to be talking about. But errors happen all the time. Maybe an error happens if an API call fails. So you click on a button to take you to the next page, and the next page requires some data to be brought in, and that call fails. So you can't load the next page, or maybe the next page doesn't load with data. You can get this error if calculations are off. So if you're trying to calculate a number that's way, way too big, maybe you'll get an error with this. You can get an error if you check if two things are equal and one is null. You'll get like a null pointer exception if we're talking about back-end work. But there's a lot of different errors that can happen. So there's different ways to handle the errors. And one of the ways is by throwing or catching exceptions. This is kind of a back-end Java route that you can take when handling errors. But on the front end, you can do a couple different things. So this is one way, a very simple way to do it. You can still have this try catch, and you can do this in JS. You can catch an error, and then you can log the error. So you can, instead of doing console.log, you can do console.error. I believe this prints out the message in red in your terminal to indicate, hey, something's up here. Here's the error message. And the error there is like an error object, so you have access to different things. Error.message is the one that I think is the most common, but there are status codes too that you can do, which are on the next page. So one way to handle it, you can just use a simple try catch and log the error that you see. But you can also handle the error specifically depending on the error code. So like I said, in a try catch statement where you have a try block with the curly braces indicating, hey, I'm going to try this method, this read file sync method. And really, the catch block is going to catch anything that happens in the try, any errors that happen in the try. So yes, an error could happen in the read file sync, but you might have a bunch of different methods that you are executing in that try block. And the catch is going to catch anything that happens in there, whether it's from read file sync or another method that you have. So anyway, to continue on, in the first example, we saw, okay, yes, simple try catch to catch any sort of error. But what if you need like the specific error, the specific code. And this is where you can interact with the error object in the catch block to call or to check for the code. So you can check, hey, is it a Enonet code? Which I forget exactly the definition of this code. I know that e-access, I think, is like an access denied. Enonet, I think that's something like something's not found. You're getting like a 404 type error there. And now when you check for the code, you can give a specific console.error message like, okay, if it is Enonet, we're going to do file not found. If it's e-access, we're going to say, oh, permission denied. Else, hey, we're just going to give a generic error. But this way you can give a more specific error and give a more specific explanation to your user on why something happened the way it did. And like I said, Java is a little bit of a different world with handling exceptions. So in Java, you can catch specific exceptions individually, and you can catch the specific exception type and then handle it however you want to handle it from there. Kind of similar to what we saw on this last slide, but I think it's way more specific. So you can see on the right there, that screenshot, I have an IO exception. I have a SQL exception. I have an just a general exception if none of those other ones are caught. So you can chain these together and you can stack the catch blocks up on top of each other. So if an exception is thrown and it's not caught in the first two catch blocks, it'll go to the general exception block and you can handle it from there. And I really like handling exceptions like this. To me, it's way more clear, especially when I'm reading the code and I'm looking at the different exceptions and I know that, okay, when we call this method, these two things can happen or these three things can happen. In JS, there's no explicit exception type. So you can't say, oh, I'm going to catch a SQL exception. All errors are handled just in one catch block, and you have to interact with the error object to determine the error. So the error object is the argument in that parentheses of the catch block, the ERR. So you have to interact with that to kind of see what the error is. It's not a bad way to do it. I just prefer it in Java because of the specificity of it. So Mergen talks about, and in the next section, Mergen specifically talks about exceptions. But in this section, we're talking about error propagation. So keeping the error propagating in order to keep your program running. So what are ways we can do to keep the error propagating? Well, we can rethrow the error. So in a try-catch block, if you do end up finding yourself in the catch block, you can simply throw the error, still log it, but you can throw it, as you see down there, rethrow the error, so that it'll get thrown to the next catch block above it. So you see we're calling this process file within another try-catch block. This error will then be thrown so that it's caught in the highest hierarchy catch block. So it'll cascade up and it'll be caught somewhere else. One way to handle it and one way to keep the error propagating. You can do this if you have a certain pattern in your project where maybe you only have your try-catch blocks at a certain level, at a certain domain. So you're only going to be catching errors in your service files, for example. So you don't want to log maybe necessarily the errors or handle the errors in your, I don't know. I was going to say repo file, but that's more of a back-end thing. Maybe some other type of JS file. So you throw them so that they're caught higher up in the hierarchy. So that's rethrowing an error. You can also keep an error propagating by using promises and rejecting the promise. So if I have a function that returns a promise, this promise is going to be using two arguments, a resolve and a reject. And you're going to call your function, and then determine if an error is present. You can reject the promise, or you can resolve the promise if it's a successful, 200 API response or what have you. So if you reject it, this is kind of like a way that you're rethrowing it. So you're rejecting it so that call fails. And then wherever you're calling this read file async, like here you're doing it in a .then promise chain, but I'm guessing you can do the same thing if you do it in a try catch as well. You'll reject the promise, and then you're able to catch it later down the line. Actually, I don't know if you'll be able to do all this read file async in a try catch. You might have to call it like this in the .then promise chaining here, and then you'll catch it. I'm talking about like a traditional try catch block, but here you'll catch it in this .catch instead of going to the then, you're going to go to the .catch and catch the error there if you reject it. So promise chaining is, again, one way to do it. And there's other ways to handle errors. We already kind of talked about this, returning or handling it based on the error code. But here, this is returning error codes that are customized or specific. So here we're validating a password. If a password is less than 8 in length, we're going to return -1 to indicate, the password's too short. Else if, this is some regex here. If the error code for a password, if the password doesn't have an uppercase letter, we're going to say it's, return -2 to indicate it doesn't have the proper uppercase letter within the password. And then wherever you're calling this method, you can then check on the result and check for the specific number. So this is very customized error handling here. So here, if the result is equal to -1, you're going to log out the error there. If the result is equal to -2, we're going to log out the error there, etc., etc. Or as long as it's not equal to 0, because 0 is equal to the success, we're going to log out the error. Another way is to use callback functions. So this is kind of like what we saw in the previous slide, a callback function here. So the read file, this would be the callback here. This error and data arguments are a function call. This would be the callback function. Now here, we're not really using it. We're rejecting or resolving the promise here as it is. But you can use a callback function, and that's what we have here. We kind of saw this on that previous slide, but specifically, a callback function is basically a function that is passed into another function. So you're going to call that when something happens in your function's execution. So here, we have a callback function as an argument, num, and a callback function. We're checking we're checking something with this number, and we're expecting a number, right? So the callback function you can call, if there is an error that you want to propagate. So here we're calling the callback function when the expected number is actually not even a number. But you can also call the callback if something is successful. So usually, what did we say? If I go back here, you see in this promise chain, we have this error in the data. That's usually kind of the setup of a callback function. First argument's an error, second argument is data. So when you call it, you can call it with the error, or if there's no error, like I said, if there is a positive or successful result, you can call it with the error as null, and you can just pass in the result to that function. And then the callback handles the result or the error in a certain way. Very similar to promise chaining where, hey, we're going into the dot then, and then we're catching anything in the dot catch. Kind of a similar setup here with the callback. And then lastly, you can just simply just log the error. And this is a very common approach to keeping things propagating and keeping your program, still running in a reasonable fashion, but also potentially letting the user know what is specifically going on when something bad happens when you're running the app. And there's ways, there's alerts. You can call alert and have a pop-up window, let the user know something was up. You can have specific snack bars that pop up, and I think there's specific components that you can use to have stuff like that pop up on the screen to show you, hey, when something messed up. Because this console.error will really only show in if you have to inspect the element of your browser to kind of have this pull up and so you can see it. So a lot of people might not know that. So that's what I'm saying is maybe the other methods like using specific components to show errors, like a snack bar, etc. But guys, that's going to do it. So that was error propagation. Next time we're going to talk specifically about exceptions, it looks like. And that's going to do it, guys. That's going to do it. Sorry, I know it took so long to get to a video with Eloquent.js. I hope this video brought some value. And if you have any questions, definitely let me know. The promise chaining stuff, I know I didn't go into it in depth, but that might need to be a video that we do. I don't know if I did a video on that already, but could be a video that we dive deeper, a topic that we dive deeper into down the line. But thank you guys very much for listening. Again, my name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.